Right, brothers, sisters, and friends, welcome back. We're going to do session 2 now with this kind of clickbait title, just to get you interested. Jesus told us exactly when he will return. All right. So what we are going to do in this session 2, we are going to look at Daniel's 70-week prophecy, which is more detail on that idea of the times of Jacob's trouble. And then really look at Zechariah 14 to get a very good idea of the status of Israel just before Jesus returns. Right. Okay, so as we showed you in the previous talk, we are on our timeline, excuse me, and we are, I've seen from scriptures that before Jesus returns, he said, I will return immediately after a time such as there never was before, this time of trouble, tribulation. So we're going to zoom in on that red part of our time frame. Okay, so this idea or phrase, Jacob's trouble, comes from Jeremiah 30, verse 50. For thus saith Yahweh, we have heard a voice trembling of fear and not of peace. Ask ye now and see whether a man doth travail with child. Wherefore do I see every man with his hands on his loins as a woman in travail, and all faces are turned into paleness. Notice the state here of the nation of Israel, right? It's like men, their faces are pale, they are bent over, and you can see the anguish there. All right. Alas, for that day is great, so that none is like it. Remember, Jesus said that time and is a time, even Daniel says time like it's never been, and Jesus said it is a time that has never been, and never ever after that will there ever be a time like that again. It's a time of Jacob's trouble, but he will be saved out of it, right? Got to drink some water here. If we go to verse 8, notice that it starts giving us a good idea what's going to happen in that time. It shall come to pass in that day, saith Yahweh of hosts, that I will break his yoke from off thy neck. So Israel will be in a state of, yoke on their necks, and will burst your bonds. Strangers shall no more serve themselves of him, Jacob, right? So in the rest of the prophecies, there's a lot of this pointing towards this idea that it talks about Israel being abused and, people despising them. And we definitely get this idea that there's a time coming that Israel will not be in the same status quo as today. But then Jeremiah says, they shall serve Yahweh the God and David the king, whom I will raise up unto them. Now notice Jeremiah is obviously, when did he prophesy? Before or after David? After, right? So David died. God promised him, I will raise up. We know the prophecies very well. After you are dead and buried, and even Solomon, then there will become someone out of your generation. Jesus prophesied, and he will be like King David, ruling from Jerusalem. And he will set up the throne of his father David, of King David, forevermore. It will be everlasting kingdom, right? So we can see we are talking about the future. But notice verse 16, therefore all they that devour you shall be devoured. And there's this lovely theme in the Bible of Israel being sheep, and there's a shepherd, but they are scattered, and the beasts of the field devour them, and so on. So we can see the imagery. And all your adversaries, every one of them, shall go into captivity, and they that spoil you shall be a spoil, and that they prey upon you will be given for a prey. That goes with Jacob's will be saved out of that. So everything the nations will do to them will be done to the nations, and God will judge the nations as well when Jesus goes out and fight the battle. Right. The fierce anger of Yahweh shall not return until he has done this, and until he has performed the intents of his heart. In the latter days you shall understand this. Right. Because in Jeremiah's time, he wouldn't have quite understand what is this all about. Why will we be in bondage to other nations and so on. And then there's always in the prophecies, times are bad now. If you repent, Israel, come back to me, then the time will come when your Savior will come. Jesus will reign. But until that time, there's a lot of things to happen still. Right. So now I want to look at Daniel's 70 weeks prophecy, because it's very important for us to understand this, because it ties up with this whole idea of Jacob's trouble, the time of the end. That's going to be very difficult for Israel. And you have to decide. There's a lot of differences of opinions as to whether this will be worldwide. Is it going to include us or not? Or is it just speaking about the Jews? But for now, let's just get the basics straight. In Daniel saw a prophecy called the 70 weeks prophecy, because it is about 70 weeks. But notice, we're not going to do all of this, but you can go check this up. This is common ground for everyone that does Bible study. A week in this prophecy means 7 years. So when you say Daniel 70 weeks prophecy, you're actually saying Daniel 77 years prophecy. Everybody happy with that? Have you, anyone here new for the first time? Ever heard that before? Can I mention names? Ask. First time did you hear this? Oh, good. You'll be amazed. Okay. I'm going to read this very quickly. Actually, I'm not going to read that, because I'm going to take those verses now and do them little by little. Okay. And you will see in verse 26 at the end there. Let's rather, the best way to do this is tell you verse 24 to 27 is on there, and now I'm going to do them verse by verse. Okay, so this is what happens. Know therefore, verse 25, and understand. I promise I copied this straight from scripture, so I didn't change any words. Okay, you can trust the text at least. Right. Know and understand. Okay, there's that thing again. So let's try and do that. From the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem unto Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. So we're talking 7 years and then 60 years. Okay, 62 years. Okay, notice a week is 7 years. Okay, the street shall be built again and the wall even unto troublous time. So what I want you to understand from this graph, when Daniel is seeing a vision from God, God says, what I'm going to accomplish with Israel, it's set. The frame, the time is set. There is 70 times 7 years. We'll do the sums just now. But after that 70, everything is done. Jesus has come back and he has fulfilled my purpose with Israel. Like we saw already, it's Jesus comes back to save them from extinction. Right. So what does this mean? There's 7 weeks, right? And then another 62 gives us how much? This is a maths question, easy. Okay, 69 weeks, right? And then until Messiah the Prince, which refers to Jesus, right? Okay. Let's carry on. Verse 26. And after the 62 weeks, after the 62 weeks, which really means after the 69 weeks now, because, and we're not going to get too much into detail of why 7 and 62. Just understand that you can go work out the numbers from history, and it's very precise, okay? But after the 62 weeks, Messiah will be cut off, but not for himself. That means Jesus is crucified. And the prince that shall come shall destroy. This is not Jesus, this is someone else. The prince that shall come to destroy the city, Jerusalem, and the sanctuary. And the end thereof shall be with a flood, and unto the end of the war, desolations are determined. Okay. And he, this prince, talking about that destroyed the city and the sanctuary, shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week, and in the midst of that week he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. Now there the alarm bell should go. Okay, good. So now we know we're in that time of tribulation. the abomination of desolation. Okay. And the obligation to cease, and for the overspreading of abominations, he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation, and that determined shall be poured out upon the desolate. So we are talking about a last week after Jesus died. There's one more week to go, and a week is 7 years. So I've tried to note it down here. Jesus is crucified, and then at the end of that week, Jesus returns. So there's a period of 7 years, but that never happened because what? We know Jesus died, and nothing that is been prophesied about that week has come to pass. We are now living 2,000 years on. So what is happening? In the midst of that week, whoever made the covenant, whoever's going to make the covenant, will start doing bad things to who? Israel, right? It's going to make desolate, and this idea of the abomination that makes desolate. Okay, I don't know if anyone here knows what that really means, but the idea is something similar happened in past history when a ruler came to the temple, desecrated it, and offered pigs in the holy temple of Israel. Now, if you understand how important the temple is to the true Jew who believes that the people of God, like they are, and that they have to sacrifice there, and that the temple is the very pinnacle of symbolism, call it an icon, if you will, for their belief and their religious system, you can understand how that affects them. Even till now, right now, they want to rebuild the temple and institute sacrifices. But it's telling us that there will be sacrifices in that week. And then in the middle of that week, there's going to be a kind of a repeat of what happened in history in the past. So, I just thought the other day, this saying of history repeats itself is true, but, we need to add something to it. History repeats itself until Jesus doesn't. Okay. Because there's going to come a time now, you'll see at the end of this week, this final week, where when Jesus comes back, history that should tell us how easy things can happen again, has finally repeated itself, and then there will be never a time of tribulation for Israel again like that, because Jesus sets up an everlasting kingdom that no one can ever destroy again. But for now, we've got this idea of this last week, and in prophecy, students can tell you we have this, what we call a theory, but it's easy proven because this week has never happened. There's a gap theory, right? So this is the beauty about the prophecy of the 70 weeks. God said, in my dealings with Israel, until that very end, when Jesus comes and saves them and the kingdom is set up forever, all that will take a period of 70 weeks, and each week is a year. But the last week, I can delay, and that happen whenever in God's time He has decided. Okay. So look at this now. This is kind of the best diagram I could find, which I feel does explain this pretty well. On the left, you'll see when the prophecy starts with the commandment to rebuild the temple and restore Jerusalem. When you look at in history, 445 before Jesus, Edict of Artaxerxes, people use that date. Some people use a bit of some other dates, but doesn't matter how you look at the past, it pretty much fits exactly. 69 times 7 is 483 years, and we can take that period of time. And really, when we look at when Jesus was crucified here in the 69 week, the end of it, ends with Jesus' death on the cross. That period of 483 years is very exact. So isn't that wonderful? We can have good confidence that this prophecy has come to pass up to there. But the last week, the 70th week, has not happened yet. And in the middle, we are talking now about the time of the Gentiles for 2,000 years has been going on, and you'll see Jesus was crucified. So at the end of the 69 weeks. So Does that make sense to everybody? It should kind of, it's not rocket science, but it is very important, right? So I want to show you now in Matthew 24, verse 5, we're going to read from there, and it references this time of great tribulation of the desolation, okay? Abomination of desolation. And it also links up very nicely with the 4 horses in Revelation. We won't do that today, but I'll just point it out. Okay. Jesus says, many will come in my name. They will claim, I am the Christ. They will fool many people. You will hear about wars. You will also hear people talking about future wars. Have you heard about wars lately? Is there any wars going on in the world? Can you mention me one? Ukraine and Russia, Hezbollah and Lebanon now, and Israel. Okay. NATO wants to go and fight Putin and who knows what. There's wars. And people are talking about future wars. When is World War III starting? Everybody, you know, when is it? It's going to start, and who knows what going on there, okay? Don't be alarmed. These things must happen, but the end is still not here. So I don't know if I should regret telling you, but that's all we've heard so far, and that's not the end. Okay. Nation will fight against nation. Kingdom will fight against kingdom. Notice the wars that are highlighted in red is the second horse in Revelation, right? The red horse, wars, right? Don't be alarmed. Okay, nation will fight against nation. Kingdom will fight against kingdom. People will go hungry. There's another horse, scarcity. There will be earthquakes in many places, right? The white horse, which some people say is the gospel, and other people say it's actually the Antichrist, and connections there. Doesn't matter. That is also prevalent today. Whether you believe either of the two, they are all present today. But Jesus says these are just the beginning of birth pains. Can you understand that what we've experienced in the world today is just a little bit of pain when a woman gives? What does that tell you? Is the future going to get worse or better? It's going to get worse, right? Then people will hand you over to be treated badly and killed. All nations will hate you because of me. I believe that's referring to Jesus saying we have this beginning of birth pains and we see things, but there's going to come a time when all nations will hate you. And we know Zechariah 14, the nations are going to come about. Right now, the Arab nations want just to drive Israel into the sea. They don't hate them, right? Hate you, okay? At that time, many will turn away from their faith. They will hate each other. They will hand each other over to their enemies. Many false prophets will appear. They will fool many people. Because evil will grow, most people's love will grow cold. But the one who stands firm to the end will be saved, right? So birth pains in the beginning, and then really bad times. Israel is hated of all enemies. But if you can just hold on to the end, you will be saved. Then in verse 15, remember now we ended off in Matthew 24, 14, verse 14, and now verse 15. The prophet Daniel spoke about the hated thing that destroys, that is in the King James, the abomination of desolation. In Daniel 9, 11, and 12, that is spoken of. Someday you will see it standing in the holy place, which is temple of God. Someday. Notice Jesus says, I don't know when, but there'll come a time in the future, because Daniel said it. There's going to be this abomination of desolation. The reader should understand. Again, prophecy is given now about bad times in the future, so that if we live in those times, we will understand and take the right action. Then, if you're in that time and you understood this, what would you have done? If you listened to Jesus, you would have flown to the mountains. Don't even go to the roof and get anything, right? And don't go back to get your coat. And pray that you are not pregnant in those days, or on the Sabbath when you can't do much, you're not allowed to travel, because you must get out of there. Okay. There will be terrible suffering in those days. It will be worse than any other form from the beginning of the world until now. and there will be never anything like it again. So Jesus says, I'm standing here from, if you look at me now and history all the way back from Adam, the days that are coming, nothing ever can compare to it. So bad it's going to be. And once that has happened, never ever will anything happen so bad again. Okay. In the time, if the time had not been cut short, no one would live. But because of God's chosen people, it will be shortened. Now, what's going on here? We know the time is set, right? There's one period of 7 years still to come. After those 7 years are finished, Jesus comes back. We don't know when it starts, but God locked it in. You can't say God's going to change his mind and say, okay, that last 7 years, I'll make it 6.5. So I'll try and explain to you just now. Okay, just want to pick your interest. What does it mean? Except the time has been shortened because of God's chosen people, Israelites in the land, and most probably us. I believe us as well. Other people say no, it's just them. We are also God's chosen people, but some people will make this last week that has to happen only applicable to the Jews, because it's too uncomfortable to think that we might be part of that. Right after that terrible suffering of those days, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not shine, the stars will not shine, the heaven bodies will be shaken, all symbolic of governments coming to an end in the Old Testament prophecies, right? At that time, Jesus will come because the Son of Man will appear in the sky, nations and earth shall be sad. They will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of the sky. He will come with power and great glory. He will send his angels to gather people from four corners of the earth. So what do we have with the 70th week? Notice I'm trying my best to show it as simplistic as I can. We have a period that must still happen in the future where there's a 1 week, 7 years to go. And in the beginning of the week, it says that ruler, whoever from that time, who destroyed Jerusalem, and who killed Jesus, right? We have to go and look. The Romans were in power. They killed Jesus. And look at that situation and then come back and say, at some stage in the future, there is going to be again someone which people call the Antichrist. The Bible does. It's a term that sometimes evokes very negative feelings with people. We just got to stick with the scriptures and be a bit neutral when we look at these things, but at least acknowledge what's taught in the scriptures. So we have an Antichrist signs a covenant with Israel. And if you think that can't happen right now, there is so many scenarios in the world at play now where that could easily happen. Okay. And then Jesus says that is just the beginning of the sorrows, but in the middle of the week, it like changes. And whoever made that covenant with Israel will change and hate them and want to destroy them. And that's what we find in the last 3.5 years. The temple is, desecrated, and all those things happen. And then at the end of that 3.5 years, Jesus returns. So Jesus told us exactly when he's coming back. But why can't we get a date? Why can't I give you the dates yet? I can't give it to you now. Why not? Because we don't know yet. Once this happens, where the 7 years starts, we will know 7 years from now. And people say, yeah, but that's not fair. I just want to explain to you, if you live in the Great Tribulation, or even before, and you say this is going to happen, most people don't understand. They don't care. Like Noah, they'll say, this is never going to happen, right? It's not there for you to then predict and look good because, okay. People won't believe you anyway, right? It's for the people who have to go through this time that when it does happen, they can say, now the clock has started. And we can see these things coming. Okay. But most of Israel is going to live through all of those 7 years and through a terrible, terrible time. Okay. So then Jesus returns at the end of that 70 weeks. This gives us a good framework to get other facts in perspective, right? There were so in Matthew 24:22, if the time had not been cut short, no one would live. But because of God's chosen people, it will be shortened. Where do you think on this graph now will the saints, notice Jesus returns right at the end of the 70 weeks. So somewhere before that, he has to gather the faithful ones, resurrect them. Where do you think that will happen? Will it happen in the first 3.5 years? No, because that's just the beginning of pains. Why? Okay. So do you agree that it has to happen there? So somewhere, if we knew the 7 years started, after 3.5 years, you're gonna say people are gonna be crazy and the world's just getting worse. And look what's going on in Jerusalem. Yeah, they wanted to fight the Arabs and they're wiping them out. It's just the same old story all over again and again. And when is the world gonna come to be a better place one day? And everyone's complaining and that. And what are we gonna say? The few people who understand another unsealing of the sealed. At Jesus' time, no one knows, but I want to propose to you that at this time, the people who are living here will know, and it's for their benefit to go through these times and hang on, right? But when will it be? It can be, can you see the question marks? I believe that's what the Bible means when it says the time will be cut short. For true believers, we do not have to live through all of this. Time is going to be cut short for us. Why? Because we're not going to be part of all of it. Because of the gathering to Jesus, the rapture, as we believe it. Does that make sense? Okay. So now, with that in mind, with looking at this last week that has to happen, let's see if we can get some idea as to what this time of tribulation for Israel is going to be like. The status of Israel before Jesus returns. And therefore we go to Zechariah 14. Zechariah 14 happens after the Great Tribulation, even events that caused Jesus to return and save Israel. We know that, right? Okay, so here we are. I've listed for you. Zechariah 37, awake, O sword, against my shepherd and against the man that is my fellow, saith Yahweh of hosts. Smite the shepherd, and the sheep shall be scattered, and I will turn my hand upon the little ones. Notice that God is first going to judge Israel for their behavior. And you have to ask yourself, it is important for us to notice that we are all eyes on Israel, and we are pro-Israel, but I want to quote very carefully here, in terms of they are God's chosen nation and what he's doing with them and how he will save them. But as in terms of the government that is there now and the things they are doing now, we have to accept the fact that for God to allow them to go through these punishments, you will understand from other prophecies, it is because of how bad a nation they have come to be in terms of nowhere near God-fearing. And we saw that in Ezekiel 37. Jesus will, only after his return and save them, will they be in a position of calling for their Savior and being willing to learn and the commandments and keep them and have God's Spirit in them and be a spiritual people again. But right now, you have to really come to a point to accept that in order for God to have them go through these kind of punishments, they have to be a bad nation, or at least the government and the rulers, right? So verse 8, it shall come to pass that in all the land, saith Yahweh, 2 parts shall be cut off and die. Do you know what 2/3 is of 7 million Jews now? It's a lot. A lot of people are going to die. Verse 9, I will bring the 3rd part through the fire and will refine them as silver is refined. God has to work with them, and I will try them as gold is tried. They shall call on my name. I will hear them and say, I will say, it's my people, and they shall say, the Lord is Yahweh is my God. So there's a change of heart. Jesus said, I will not come again until the day that you say, blessed is he that comes in the name of Yahweh. So the second half of the last week of Daniel's prophecy, 2/3 of the land will die. The enemies have invaded the land and conquered it on the route of Jerusalem, right? If you want to it's so interesting to me. We always talk on how people will fight and all the nuclear weapons and that. When Russia fights Ukraine, they can shoot weapons, but in the final analysis, to take Kiev, what will I have to do? The tanks have to roll. Soldiers on the feet around Jerusalem. That's what happened when the Roman Empire conquered Jerusalem. They first destroyed everything and burned down the cities in Israel, and then they got to Jerusalem, right? And that's what's going to happen again in the future. We're going to see a time when there's nobody in Israel. Right now, Hezbollah is firing rockets, and the Israelis went out of the settlements in the north. And that's why they're so upset. Now they're fighting Hezbollah, and Lebanon's getting involved, all the nations around about. And Israel is not occupying. Their land is getting desolate in little bits already. We look around and we say it's so easy for the events of today to develop to what we see here in the prophecies, okay? So that makes us sad, but also excited, because, you know, sometimes for a wound to be cured, it has to first get very painful and apply the remedy, and then we can get on with it, right? Notice, just like 70 AD Jerusalem, when Jerusalem was the last bastion that was conquered by the Romans, the same scenario is going to develop in the future. Okay, so I want to show you something interesting that will be very helpful for the next session. When did we start the session, by the way? 2:45? Okay, I must just skip yeah. Let's look at Zechariah 14. First of all, I want you to notice that in just Zechariah mentions Jerusalem 10 times in 21 verses. In the next session, we're going to look at Ezekiel 38, and Jerusalem's never even mentioned in that chapter. And you have to decide after these two sessions whether you believe Zechariah and Ezekiel 38 is talking about the same event, and it is crucial to your understanding of prophecy and in the future. So right now, let's just focus on Zechariah. All nations to Jerusalem, right? I've summarized in the verses for you what is standing there, and you can go check, but you can trust the text, my text here. It says there, verse 3, Yahweh will go and fight against the nations, but it's Jesus on his behalf, as when he fought in the day of battle. And interesting enough, it's in the valley of Jehoshaphat. And if you go read 2 Chronicles 20, which we'll, I think, do in the next session, it's amazing the comparisons as to when Jehoshaphat saved Israel in those days. Exactly the same is going to happen here with Zechariah. It's like a prototype of what Jesus is going to do here. He returns to the Mount of Olives. In verse 4, it says, then the Jews will flee. Okay. There's no safe dwelling for them. They're already taken captivity, and then there's no further Jews fleeing. Jesus comes with the sides. Saints, there's not light or dark that day. The living waters then flows from Jerusalem when Jesus rules as a renewed Jerusalem. And it says in verse 11, there is no more utter destruction. What does that imply? Before Jesus came, there was utter destruction. That's the way the Bible talks about what's going to happen to Israel. Utter destruction. It's going to get to a point when only a third of the city is left. And people will say, well, this is a repeat of 80-70. It's just the way it's going to go now. A few weeks from now, Jerusalem's totally destroyed. No more Jews. And whoever takes the land at that time, they've got it. Another part of Israel's history. We still have to wait for Gog to come down. But no, this is not going to be another repeat. This is the final one. Zechariah is the final one. We know that. And then it says in verse 11, please remember this. After Jesus comes and wins that battle, Jerusalem is then going to be safely inhabited. And we will talk in session 3 about what the Bible says about dwelling in safety and what it means to live in safety and the implications for our time frame, right? But definitely before Jesus comes, there is no safety for the Jews. Like we see now, the people who still had this idea of, oh, they feel safe and their armor will keep them safe and they got the best army. Those things are slowly dawning on them that this is not at all the case. They can so quickly get into this position where they are destroyed and just a third of Jerusalem is still there. And where's our Savior going to come from? Who's going to save us from this? Right. Then it goes on to say, how's the enemy destroyed? There's a plague. Their flesh consumes away for those people who came against Jerusalem. The nations are terrified and they fight each other. But there's specific mention of Judah that fights at Jerusalem. And if you go to other Old Testament prophecies, it's like with Jehoshaphat, you'll see that it's very interesting the way when you get the sense that when Jesus comes and he starts going out to war, then whoever is still left in the land, the third that's left in the land, and the people in Jerusalem, they get like some encouragement and courage, and then they go with the saints in Jesus and fight, right? And the wealth of the nations that he even wrote about was taken. And what did they take? Gold, silver, and clothing. Interesting where the wealth comes to Jerusalem after Jesus. Then later on, people want to come down and get it. Okay. Verse 15, plague of verse 12 is also on the animals. And what is the result? All nations are subdued. They must go to Jerusalem once a year to worship Jesus and the Feast of Tabernacles. All the nations round about is subdued, right? Those people that encircled Jerusalem, the Armageddon, everybody against Jerusalem, Armageddon. And you get the sense then Jerusalem is a safe place to go. Jesus subdued all those enemies round about. He's now king in Jerusalem, and they must come there to worship. So it's now a safe place. Egypt is in the south, subdued. The Canaanites, the north, right around. If you look at those countries or mentioned there, it's those countries surrounding the Arab nations surrounding Jerusalem at the moment. The focus is all on the Middle East. Verse 21 says there will be sacrifice in Yahweh's house, and Jerusalem is mentioned. Begs the question, will there be a temple when Jesus comes back? That's very debatable, but you have to decide as a student of the Bible. It is interesting to note that when David came, he cleared all the enemies round about. Then he had peace, and his son, Solomon the Wise, built the temple. There's a pattern there. Jesus comes, destroys all the nations round about. He is the greater David, and he's also the wisest man of all time. David and Solomon all in one. Will be fitting, sort of the pattern, if he then builds a temple. Right. So let's look at this quickly. I want to show you this, and then I think we're nearing the end, but there's a few verses to go through. Let's look at this comparison then in 2 Chronicles 20, when Jesus, in Zechariah 14, it says Yahweh will go and fight Jesus on his behalf as when he fought in the day of battle. And this is, I believe, one of the things it refers to. And isn't it nice to think that the King Jehoshaphat, what does Jehoshaphat mean? The Valley of Jehoshaphat, the very king with that name, did something very similar. Notice the similarities there. Came to pass after this also in Chronicles 20, that the children of Moab, Arab countries now round about, the children of Ammon, and them others beside the Ammonites, came against Jehoshaphat to battle. So you can sense Zechariah 14 here. These Arab nations all encircling Jerusalem. And when they began to sing and praise, Yahweh set ambushments who ambushed the enemy against the children of Ammon, Moab, and Mount Seir. It must have been Judah, because they in around Jerusalem and with King Jehoshaphat, right? So they put ambush there, and then they were smitten, right? Verse 16, tomorrow go down against them. Behold, they shall find them at the end of the brook before the wilderness of Jura. Look what happens in Zechariah 12, verse 2. Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling unto all the people round about, when they shall be in siege both against Judah and Jerusalem. 12 verse 4, Zechariah. In that day, saith Yahweh, I will smite every horse with astonishment and the rider with madness. I will open mine eyes upon the house of Judah and will smite every horse and people with blindness. Right? And then Zechariah 12 verse 6. In that day will I make governors of Judah like a hearth and a fire among the wood. They will like a torch of fire in the sheaf. When Jesus goes out and defeats his enemies like a fire burning, it's Judah that is the ones who light it and is kindled and goes and does it, right? On the right hand and on the left, and Jerusalem shall be inhabited again in her own place, even in Jerusalem. There's a lovely similarities. It's like Jehoshaphat's battle is a prototype, so we can see what kind of going to happen there when Jesus comes. Okay. Although God wins the battle by causing the enemy blindness and enemies fighting each other, there is also an element of Judah fighting and destroying a wicked, ambushed enemy. Can you all see this? How does God destroy Gog in Ezekiel 38? Who knows? Who can answer that? They also fight against each other, but there's no Judah involved, no Jerusalem. It's all on the mountains. So there is I'd say, something we have to be aware of. In the Bible, there are, if two events are described and they are of wars and there's some similarity, doesn't mean they're the same. The similarity can be because of, if it says in this war, the end of the war was the result that God got the glory, and in this one, God got the glory. Does it mean they're the same? Not necessary. It could be two different wars. God gets the glory because they are won by his people, but it doesn't mean they're the same. Okay, so we must be careful to say, in this war, God gave the victory because these people fought themselves, got mad and fought themselves. And then there's a similar element in this war. Could be the same war, but it could also be a different war that have same elements in them, right? But there's some things that are so different that you have to say they can't be the same sometimes. Okay, you have to make up your mind here. But for now, when we look at Jehoshaphat's battle, it's a perfect prototype of what Jesus is going to do in Zechariah 14. In Zechariah 14:13, it shall come to pass in that day, there shall be a great tumult among them. They shall lay hold every one of the hand of his neighbor, and his hand shall rise up against the hand of his neighbor. That happened in Jehoshaphat. The children of Ammon and Moab stood up against the inhabitants of Mount Seir, utterly to slay and destroy them. And when they had made an end of the inhabitants of Seir, everyone helped to destroy another. So basically, it's telling us when Jesus comes back, he's going to fight the Arab nations round about, and what other nations have their armies there helping them. And part of the winning of the victory is going to be Judah, the Israelites there fighting, but they're not going to have to do too much fighting. Why? Because how are most of them going to die? The enemy. They're going to fight against each other. Right? Okay, so Jesus's victory at Armageddon, Zechariah 14, turns Israel's fortunes from being on the brink of destruction to everlasting peace, safety, and prosperity. That is clearly to be seen here, Zechariah 14:11. And men shall dwell in it, Jerusalem and Israel, and there shall be no more utter destruction, but Jerusalem shall be safely inhabited. What did it say when Jehoshaphat had his battle? The fear of God was on all the kingdoms of those countries when they had heard that Yahweh fought against the enemies of Israel. So the realm of Jehoshaphat was quiet, and God gave him rest round about. You can just, if you look at Israel now, the people scattering and people on a soccer field, and the next moment they're dead, children. Can you imagine a time when in Israel there will be no one wanting them removed, no one fighting against them, perfect harmony. It's like two little brothers fighting, and then 10 minutes later, they're the best of friends. That's what Jesus is going to do between the Arab nations and the Jews. Jacob and Esau, two brothers, fighting each other, becoming two nations, and only when the true Messiah comes that has to inherit the land and it's his, they will stop fighting over it. If two boys fight over a toy and you take the toy away and say, it's not yours, by the way, it's mine, then they forget about it again and start behaving. Okay. So lastly then, this idea about the nations, I see we're doing good time. The nations roundabout. Let's just familiarize ourselves with that so that will help us also when we look at the world today and we try and see how much of what's happening today is lining up, how much or not, or a little or even more with what we know is going to happen at the end time. Okay, so better to take the broad framework and know exactly what is in place where and the framework, and then as that becomes more unsealed, we will hopefully be the ones that understand. So the Middle East at the moment, if you look at that map, you will see countries we talk about. Out of the map there, more north is Russia, obviously. Then we have Turkey, Iran in Iraq, Saudi Arabia. Notice that we have then in the black circle there, we have the nations that you can say is round about Israel, okay? And they are the Arab nations, Syria, Lebanon is there. We have the Gaza Strip of Palestine, whatever people call it these days. Jordan. Those are the nations around about Israel that fit the bill very well for people who are going to be against Israel when Jesus returns, like with Jehoshaphat and his battle. All right. So if we zoom in on that, you will see what I'm trying to make the point is if we look at the world today, these nations, they are very much today the scenario of Zechariah 14. It's in place to fulfill that prophecy. And it can happen at any time, but there's one element missing. That's why we know the situation today is almost what we want, but it's not right there. What is missing? Remember, the great tribulation of these nations almost, they haven't wiped out Israel yet. Israel is saying, we will fight and we can defend ourselves, and okay, and they're calling on their own strength. When this scenario, it will stay there, it will not go away, but something's going to be added. The minute the 7 years kick off, then we know now we're going to get to a time where 3.5 years go by, and after that, they start destroying Israel. They go and make inroads. The tanks roll over in the Golan Heights and start, taking out the villages as other, that long drawn out war with Russia and Ukraine. They now trying to roll in and so on. So once that kicks off, then this is already there and it's ready to happen. Notice here, isn't this amazing? David says in Psalm 118, verse 10, all nations. Now, that doesn't mean each and every nation in the world at that time, but meaning all the nations round about. All the Arab nations as we see today and in those days, right? All nations compass me about, but in the name of the Lord, the name of Yahweh, will I destroy them. What did Jesus say? I'm not coming back until you say, blessed is he. Comes in the name of Yahweh, because we need Yahweh to go into battle to save us from being destroyed. They compassed me about, but in the name of Yahweh, I will destroy them. And look at David's kingdom. David's kingdom was Israel and all these Arab nations right around that will be there on the day of Zechariah. Because Hezbollah will be there, but that's Lebanon, right? and all the other nations. So we're expecting a country like Jordan, which is kind of pro or neutral, to become also one of those that will hate Israel. But these nations are the nations of Psalm 83. In Psalm 83, people call them the inner circle nations. And you'll see they all, if you look at the territory where those nations was in the time of David and Psalm 83, it's the exact same geographical location as those Arab nations today, which we find there, and that will never go away. So we have God's got an issue with Israel and those the nations Esau and Jacob, and that's never going to change. And although he's given the exact time that last week must still be fulfilled, and at the end half of that last week, the 3.5 years, all these things will come into play because someone is going to unite these people, and there's the 10 toes and the kingdom that Jesus has to come and destroy. Okay, so what am I trying to say? If we look at all this, Jesus, the greater David, is to fulfill the promise to David to establish his kingdom forever. Jesus will start off doing exactly what David did. He will subdue the nations round about. He's the only one then that will solve the Middle East problem, because after the victory in Zechariah 14, the kingdom just goes from there, and it grows and subdues other nations later on. Okay. I think we've got one slide to go. Timing was good. Is this making some kind of sense? Right. Where and how to look out for and at events today and the implications. Number one, how will the events be unfolding to work towards getting us in the position for the end game, the last 7 years? I feel that's where we should look. And that means Middle East. Look at the Middle East. Look at those nations there. What is happening there today? What is going to be the treaty with the man of sin, the Antichrist? Who is going to be the person that gets 10 of these nations? Maybe those countries round about, representing them geographically. Get them to unite and give their power to this man who has got some other kingdom power. An image has to stand, including what the Roman Empire, represented in those days. If we look at the image of Daniel, so we're looking at Europe and we're looking at the Middle East. At the moment, if you look at a man into that king's son in Saudi Arabia, yeah, he is making economic deals with Israel. He's very well favored with the Arabs. There could be a peace treaty coming that would fulfill and start off the 7.5 years. But some people will misinterpret that as, there's peace, now Russia can come down. It's two different things. Okay, it's a false peace. Right. After 3 years of the tribulation, I'm putting here the current potential threat will reemerge at a scale that will almost destroy Israel. And what I'm trying to point out here is we are getting so used to and desensitized about Israel and Arabs are fighting again. Yeah, but last time, okay, now it dies down. And then that happens again and again. It will happen again. It's just one of those times they'll make peace. And then all of a sudden, no, it's the last one, and Jesus is back to save it. So we got to be on our toes. Peace, peace, then sudden destruction. It's not to say that Israel and their connection with the United States and Turkey and Iran and Russia doesn't play a role in prophecy, but all those nations are, in their time of the Gentile interactions with each other, are all working together for this final scenario of Zechariah 14 to take place, okay? If the 7 years have not started, Jesus will still remain away for at least another 7 years. Now, I will be honest with you, my prayers have changed a lot. I remember 26, 7 years ago when my son and Leona, our son, died, I was praying to God, make Jesus return tomorrow. I don't pray like that anymore. I pray, I know Jesus will return within 7 years, maybe shortest. God grant me the courage and the wisdom to, if difficult times come, to remain through that. Where's our focus going to be? It's going to be on Israel and the Middle East, the nations round about. Okay, so with that now said, in session 3, we will now deal with Russia. Why is Russia such a big issue? What's going to happen? And we're going to look at that in the next session when we look at Ezekiel 38 and Gog and see if we can put that in place and wrap up the whole session. Thank you for your ears and your patience.